how it is that a scientist can make the translation. And I think that starts with the most fundamental and valuable skill, which is the ability to explain what you do so that someone else values it. If you can't explain what you do, then no one will give you credit for it. And it starts with something as simple as being able to explain what you do to your grandmother. Because if you can explain what you do to your grandmother, all these esoteric research projects we work on, if he or she can understand, then you know you've explained what's interesting and valuable about it. And it's just a simple little rule I've come up with that it really works for me. And the funny thing is that, as an entrepreneur and the scientist in a high-tech environment, you're often talking to people that really don't understand the basis, the science for what you do. So you have to put it in simpler terms. Often the financial people, the business people that you're paired with, they just don't understand. You can't explain it as a scientist. You have to explain it as a layperson. So that's the most important skill. Once you figure out how to do that, then what you find is you're that rare scientist that can bridge the gap between the geek world and the entrepreneurial world, and you become a translator of the value between the two, and you're pretty valuable. So it's presentation skills, it's communication, it's being able to simplify your message, not dumb it down, because that's not what it is. It's simplify. There's a very big difference. And that I think is the most important skill. Then you just have to be in the right environment where you have people that you can learn from, and you can have the patience to get trained by people that are good. So I did a PhD in molecular toxicology at the University of Wisconsin with a focus in cancer biology. I did a postdoc at the NIH in human genome research, basically early in the sequencing and use of all that sequence data. But I knew, even as a PhD student, before I started graduate school, I knew that I didn't want to be a professor. I just knew that I loved science, and I thought research was cool, but I don't have the patience for it. I just simply don't have the patience to be, on a 15-year horizon. You have to be so dedicated as a professor. I'm an impatient person, and I like an inbox and an outbox. I like to sign things and move one thing to the other. And I discovered pretty early on that I liked to teach and to talk about science, and so that's how it started for me, is presenting and figuring out, hey, I'm kind of good at this part, which is explaining. And when I finished my PhD, I chose a sort of non-traditional technology kind of postdoc. It wasn't a deep biology postdoc. That led me to a startup technology company, and at that company I learned to bridge the gap from being sort of the head of research eventually to being a junior business person, because the business team was all very senior people, very experienced high-tech business people, but they couldn't really understand the technology. And so for me, I was the person that could explain it and wanted to explain it, and was willing to not speak when they didn't want me to, and willing to answer when they did. And that gave me the chance to be part of some really exciting experiments, companies that turned into big successes. And during that first company, I grew from being a researcher to a junior business person to eventually leading the business team and selling the company. And that's happened now several times. The translation of research value into economic value or entrepreneurial value. And I think there's lots of great research, but there has to be a deep unmet need in the market for that research to become a product. So, oftentimes companies are founded based on technologies, and the companies struggle to find a fit or a reason to be, and it's because what they had was a great experiment that yielded a great result, but they didn't have a platform that was disruptive and would serve a need in the market. So, it's I guess nothing more than that. You have to really ask whether what you're doing, is it a better research platform for researchers to use, and can it be turned into that product? You can't actually affect people unless you translate it into a product. So that's why I do what I do. How do you turn a research concept into a product? And I actually think that's one of the most important skill sets or technologies that a startup has to develop. A product development paradigm, a new product introduction system, effectively. A systematized way to evaluate the idea, to study its feasibility, to turn it into a research process that turns into a development. It's not You don't have to reinvent that method. It exists in every major company around the world, a new product introduction system. And as a startup, you need to take that into account and build something simple that works for your culture. But there needs to be a way that the research team takes what they think is an idea, a good idea, and specify it. You first have to ask the market, the place where you think it's valuable. A lot of effort and a lot of conversations, you can come up with a list of requirements. It has to be purple. It has to be room temperature. It has to be packaged a certain way. It has to be safe, whatever, a whole series of different requirements. And then the R&D team can sit down with those and specify, what does that mean? Well, what does it mean to be purple? What does it mean to be room temperature? What does it mean? These are simple examples, but so then you take that requirement and you have to specify it. The R&D team has to figure out how do you turn that list of high-level requirements into an actionable set of specifications that you can develop on. And if you can do that, and honestly, that's more work than the actual project itself. It can take months and hundreds, thousands of hours to do this right, even for the simplest product. Then you have a pretty good idea of not only what it needs to do, but how you're going to get there. Then it's just simply project management. You put a bunch of people in a room, you give them the resources and the time to do it, and the scientists are incredibly well self-motivated and focused. It's really about getting out of the way. Once you know where you're going, and make sure everybody rows in the same direction. So I think writing down your goal is critical. I've been part of project teams and companies where I've walked into those companies and 20 people, they're spending millions of dollars a year, and they have those 20 people on that project team have 20 different ideas of the product they're trying to develop because they've never actually spent the hard time to figure out to write it down. So, having a new product introduction system, a system for thinking about the goal and how you're going to get there in a stepwise way, measuring your progress, it's really important. And actually, while it's a pain to develop, it's actually pretty fun as a scientist to be part of a team like that. If you've got 20 people every day coming in, thinking about that goal, it's a lot more fun than 20 people sort of working together. So it makes a team a real team and a company a real company. Connection between science innovation and business innovation. And I actually think the simple answer is that every startup starts with some sort of a business plan and some idea of how they're going to, turn this idea into a product, into value. And the reality is, I think there's a quote that's something like, no business plan survives its first contact with the customer without changing. And it's true. You really have no idea what you're actually going to do until you start to go out and start doing it. So what I've learned in the startup world, I've been part of 4 startups that I think are, 2 successful, built from zero to exit, and 2 that are moving really well. And I think in the end, you're really betting on the people, because you do your best to guess that the idea is a good idea and how to how to develop it. But the reality is, you're going to have major shifts in your understanding of the value and how to make value, and you're betting on whether those people can work as a team to figure it out. It's something unique I think it's why we do it pretty well in the US and it doesn't happen so well in other countries. In my experience when I've been overseas, that they're looking to replicate. But it's that team that must find a solution that doesn't have an alternative. And you're betting on that, really. So, because it never goes as planned. It's usually 5 major twists and turns, some major number. How to evaluate need and how to determine where the need is. And I think that you can't. I think that you can only guess, and then you go test it and you find out. And you find out that what you thought was a need isn't, but hey, there's this other spot just next door where there really is an opportunity. I don't think you almost never guess correctly in the beginning exactly how what you've invented is going to turn into something exciting and valuable. You just have a general sense for it, and then you go test it. To just consider the difference between a customer-focused approach to developing something versus a product-focused approach. And there's a lot of ways to answer that. My short answer, my gut reaction is the former is the way you do it. The second is a guarantee of a lot of wasted time and money. If you're focused on, I'm not sure what product focused means, but I think that, internally focused, the sooner you get out there and start asking people what they really need and starting to test that thing, the quicker, the more likely you are to hit the mark, to find something really valuable. The longer it takes you to get something that you can actually show people and test with them, and the more likely you are way out on a limb. So I think any good team has to be focused on what is the market telling us we need as a product, and how do we get as quickly as possible to start testing that thing. Even if it's not for money, it's just to get feedback. So my name is Nuwasir. I've been lucky enough to be part of 4 startups acquired by global multinationals and 2 that are still in process. And it's a great system to be part of.